All right, thank you so much for joining us here at News 19. I'm Andrea Mock, and with a man who now needs no introduction, Creighton Waters has become a household name, of course, the lead prosecutor in the Alex Murdaugh double murder trial. Creighton, thank you so much for spending the time to come and talk with us today. I know our viewers have been glued to every second of this case.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to talk to you.
All right, so the first question is, how has life been for you the last couple of days?
It's really been a crazy experience. There's been so much outpouring from the community and actually across the nation and across the world. I think the weirdest thing for those of us who've been doing this after having done it for 6 weeks and then all the prep going up to that, when you're living under that kind of stress for so long, it's difficult to unplug. And I think we've all kind of experienced that none of us can really relax. It's just maybe finally, now that we're a week later, that some of us are really able to relax because your body's just telling you got to be doing something. It's not used to having nothing to do. So that's probably the weirdest thing there.
I have been tweeting out, Creighton, and hashtagging your name for 6 weeks, all of the major points you were making in court with a hashtag, and now all of a sudden you joined Twitter.
Yeah.
And it exploded.
Yeah, I sent my first tweet out on Saturday, and it's been pretty crazy, the amount of response. I actually created that account back in 2012, and I think I logged in once or twice, and it's just been sitting there dormant. And I decided to tweet as I was packing up my hotel room, which was kind of nostalgic. You know, we had really lived there for a long time, made a lot of friends there, and so I sent out a tweet, and it really took off in a crazy way.
And you're a guitar player.
Yeah, and then I sent out a guitar video, and so that was kind of fun as well. That's always a good thing, and I've been doing that ever since I was 15, and have some good friends that I play with and other bands I've been in, and we have a good time doing that.
One of the many things you gave up for the last
year? Yeah. I mean, that was probably the least that I have played guitar since I was 15. I got my first guitar in May of 2015, and that was probably the longest period of time. In fact, for the first 4 weeks, I didn't even have one down there, and then I finally brought one down, but I hardly touched it while I was down there. It's a 12 to 20 hour a day job when you're doing something like that. So it's just not much time for that.
And I have to ask now, since you said that before we dive in the case, I got to speak to you this weekend. You said you'd lost 10 pounds. You lived in a hotel. You just told me you skipped most meals and ate canned soup. Not the glamorous life some people know now for somebody that's a household name.
Well, yeah, I mean, so my typical routine, and the breakfast that they had there at the hotel, we made friends with the ladies that worked down there in the kitchen, and so I would eat a big breakfast. They really took care of us. I was sad. That was part of the reason why I was sad to see them go. They were just a bright spot every morning, always so cheerful. Eat a big breakfast. I tend not to eat lunch during trial. I'll eat, a couple of energy bars or something like that, and then, dinner. Some of the other team, they might get to go out to eat. I think I maybe went out to eat, not during the weekends, maybe 4 times in its entirety, and generally somebody would bring me back some takeout, or it might be some canned soup or peanut butter and jelly. Or it's just every minute seemed like it had to matter, and it was. It was difficult to go to a restaurant and sit there and order and wait for the food. The normal things that you're used to doing, but when you're in the middle of that thing, you're watching those minutes tick by, and there's just so much work to be done that, typically I would stay in the room and continue to work. But we still had a lot of fun. We had a great time, particularly on the weekends. The whole team just working so hard, and it was really, it reminded us all of dorm life, cramming late for tests and that sort of thing, and then, staying up late and getting up early, and, occasionally a little fun. So, it was a great experience.
Well, let's dive back into the case now. You got to see the evidence before any of us did. We saw it for the first time when it was put on trial, and you had a witness come up and testify. But when you were going through all the mountains of evidence, what is the first point that you saw that you thought, we got him, the jury's going to understand this?
Well, I think, so the way this case developed, initially it was with the 14th Circuit Solicitor's Office, the local solicitor, and it was not until August 11th that he conflicted the case to the Attorney General's office, and it was not until a couple weeks later, after the side of the road, that I was brought in. And of course, what I normally do is state grand jury. We do complex white collar public corruption, gangs, narcotics cartel stuff. And the side of the road had just happened, and something struck me that this is extremely unusual. These things may relate to one another. So the first thing that we did was start to look at that. Of course, I was aware even prior to that that the blackout that was used to kill Maggie was a family weapon. The cases that were found around her body matched weathered cases found at other places of the property. So obviously that's a very, very significant fact as you look at this. And then there's just an exhaustive investigation going on, but I think as I've said, all those roads continued to lead back to Alex. But probably the first thing that stuck out to us was the fact that, okay, we've got a family weapon that's committing these crimes, and obviously that's concerning. And then all of a sudden we're discovering that this man, Alex Murdaugh, was not who anyone thought he was, and that's certainly concerning. So we started to explore those factors.
In so many cases, especially a murder case that you've tried before, it is very rare for a defendant to take the stand in his own defense. Were you excited, nervous? What were your emotions knowing that you were going to get to speak to Alex Murdaugh and ask him what you wanted to ask him?
I always was confident. I felt confident that he was going to take the stand, and it's certainly nervous. Everything about this is nervous, but when you do something like this, if you're not a little nervous, no matter how long you've been doing it, you're probably not paying attention and not as focused as you need to be. That was obviously very exciting. I was looking forward to that. I thought that he would not be able to help himself and that he would take the stand, and he did. And then I thought that it was going to take a while, but I eventually could get the jury see him lie in real time, see him make those mental processes to do that, and I thought that was that was going to be pretty devastating. That cross, I thought, ended up being fairly pivotal. And of course I started the cross on one day, and I knew that I would be cut off by the end of the day after a couple hours. So to some extent I had to kind of slow walk it, because I knew in many respects I'd be starting over the next morning. And you really have to do it for a while and do it for a long time to sort of get the defendant kind of where you want them. So that was really a moment I had been expecting the entire trial, and one that we were prepared for.
All right, speaking of the cross, for those of us that were following the case closely, you asked the same question again and again, trying to get Alex to answer about looking his clients in the eye and being able to lie. I understood the point you were trying to make, is that this is somebody who can lie to anybody about anything. You brought up Hakeem Pinckney, you brought up the Plyer sisters, you brought up, of course, Tony Satterfield and what his family had been through, but you couldn't get him to say definitively. I mean, he skirted around every time you asked the question if he could look them in the eye. Why was that so important for you to get the jury to hear?
Well, just because he had just done that to them. He had, he's a very skilled trial lawyer, and he had just, during his direct testimony, leaned forward and made eye contact with those jurors, much as you do, and just had tried to convince them, much as I knew that he would, because he was so confident in his ability to do so. But he had made eye contact with those jurors, and I just wanted them to understand this is the kind of man that can do that, can be very convincing and seem very sincere and genuine, but it's not. It's absolutely not. He had that one rote answer he clearly had practiced, and I think at one point I said, well, why don't I just write that down on a piece of paper and you can just hold it up every time you want to get that answer. But obviously in cross you can't let him off the hook in that way. And so it was important to do that. It was also, a lot of that was that first day, and again, I needed to not cross over until where I wanted to go too early, because if I did that at the end of the day, you kind of lose your momentum overnight, and you have to kind of start over. So and then I did the next day and start over. So also a different cross in that a traditional cross, you try to really control the conversation, but that's not what I wanted to do with this guy. This guy's very, very confident in his ability to be convincing and to talk to people and to talk his way and to be the biggest person in the room. And so I wanted to get him talking. And so I had intentional pauses because he couldn't stand that. He would come up with something new and I'd be like, great, let's talk about that. And I think the net result of that was that the jury got to see him continue to add to and perfect and construct his lie as the time went on. And obviously certainly, they can speak for themselves, but I think that was pretty devastating.
Something else that really struck me in your cross of Alex Murdaugh was hitting home the point that while he remembered some very specific, minute details of this June 7th, he could not remember the last thing he said to Maggie and Paul.
Correct. Yeah, he had one that struck me was he had this very specific memory of the phone falling down in the console to explain why he was pausing at Alameda in the car for a while, because the GPS data showed that. And that one just kind of stuck out to me, that he could remember that very specific thing from that night, but couldn't remember his last conversation with his wife and son. He couldn't remember what he was doing during 9:02 to 9:06 when he's not only making multiple phone calls, but his phone shows more steps than it had shown all day. He's an extremely busy guy there. I think that's when I asked him, were you on a treadmill, were you doing jumping jacks and that sort of thing, which was a kind of a light moment, but the point was valid. I mean, his phone just fired up and became active, and I think that was very telling to the jury, and clearly showed what we argued to the jury, that he left his phone at the house intentionally. And was doing so to manufacture an alibi, but when he picked it up, he was a busy guy.
283 steps, I remember that too.
283 steps in 4 minutes.
And talking about him getting on the stand, what was your reaction the first time? The prosecution had already put several witnesses on the stand that said that's him at the kennel video, that's him. He was with his family at 8:44 to 8:45.
Right.
According to other testimony, their time of death was around 8:49. That's when both Maggie and Paul stopped using their phone. The first time you heard Alex say, "That's me," what was your reaction?
Well, I didn't know what he was going to do until he got on the stand. I mean, if people I think were starting to wonder, why do y'all keep doing that? Why are y'all putting up one witness after another to say that's him on the kennel video, that's him on the kennel video? Well, that was because he had always denied he was there. There was a young man before the kennel video came out who had told police that he was on the phone with Paul and thought he heard Alex's voice. But while I don't think Alex liked that, that's explainable. Oh, he was mistaken, and that's what you heard from the interview. That's what he told police. Oh, he must have been mistaken. It wasn't me. I would be surprised if he thought that. But when the kennel video came out, that was obviously a little bit different. But the first time that I ever heard him say that, the first time his own brothers ever heard him say that, oh, okay, wait a minute, I was at the kennels just a moment before they died, was when he got on the stand. And, I think the jury saw through that, and I think that was pretty devastating. When I started this case, and you look at how I was going to put the evidence up, this case is different because normally, if Alex wasn't the person who did it, he would be our first witness. He would be the grieving father, with very emotional testimony, who came upon this terrible scene. But we couldn't do that. But I also needed to get the jury very familiar with his voice, which is a very distinctive voice. So I'm going to have to play the 911 tape. I'm going to have to play the body cam with Daniel Green. I'm going to have to play those statements. Well, the risk there is that you're also sort of playing his exculpatory version of events for the jury. So I have to do that in a manner that has them thinking critically about what he's saying, but also getting very familiar with his voice, so that by the time I first played the kennel video, while it was important to have that witness there and say, yes, that's Alex, I know him, the jury's hearing it themselves. And by that point, they're familiar enough with his voice that they can make that same conclusion.
I want to bring up something you said in your closing argument, and this is something that I think a lot of our viewers might have seen, perhaps a glare during some of your cross of Alex Murdaugh. You brought up him glaring at you when he came in and out of the courtroom every day.
Right.
What did it, and people have testified too, and that this was a dynasty, this was generations. Even Judge Newman said his family had been prosecuting people for a century.
Correct. Did
any of that ever intimidate you?
No, it really didn't. It's the kind of thing that enthuses me, and I worked with Mr. Randolph and had nothing but the highest respect. Buster's time was before mine, so it wasn't that. But what we do in state grand juries, we do a lot of public corruption. We do a lot of like I said, narcotics cartels. So those sorts of things. The influence doesn't intimidate us or concern us. It doesn't make us any more anxious to go after someone, but if the evidence is there, the influence factor is something we're used to. And I think that when we look at this case, as we look at other cases the state grand jury has done, we're looking for cases or like to be involved in cases that have an effect beyond just that particular case, that have a larger effect on the community, that have a larger effect on systems and that sort of thing. Alec is presumed innocent of those white-collar offenses, and he will get a fair trial on those, and I want to be clear about that. But that's an important part of this particular case, because this is the kind of thing that I think can expose undue influence in a system and how it can be abused by those in power. And if you can put a stop to that, or if you can expose that sort of thing and make the systems better, then that's the kind of thing that we really like to do in the state grand jury. Fundamentally, this case was about Maggie and Paul. That's the most important thing about it, and I don't mean to minimize that, because that was our fundamental goal, was to make sure that justice was done for them. But there are other aspects of this case and other aspects of what Alec was doing that if we can shine a light on that and put a stop to that and make sure the system is fairer for everyone, then that's an extremely important goal too.
You've led me into my next question. Being in charge of the state grand jury, working so closely with them, what is next? I know a lot of people would love to see Gloria Satterfield, their former housekeeper's case, reopen. Of course, Tony Satterfield, who took the stand, and his testimony to me was some of the most heartbreaking. What case will be next?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, first of all, anything that's not indicted, I can't comment on any pending investigations other than to say that we're taking a very broad look at all aspects of this case sort of writ large. We have indicted 99 white-collar offenses to date, and I can't comment specifically on those, and I do also have to point out that he's presumed innocent until he's had a fair trial on those. But we also plan to aggressively pursue those for the reasons I just talked about. Eventually, we will have a status conference with the judge, and we will get those scheduled. There's a lot of white-collar alleged victims out there, including the Satterfield boys, including some of the other names that you mentioned, and it's important that there be a voice for their situations as well, and we plan to pursue those. There are other defendants out there who are also presumed innocent, but we've indicted the banker from Palmetto State, who's Russell Lafitte. And we've indicted Corey Fleming, who's another lawyer down that way, and so those defendants will need to be addressed as well. So our work is still cut out for us in this matter, and we're not done yet, and we're certainly not going to sit back after this verdict too long. We'll be getting back to work and digging on these matters. And on top of that, we still have drug cartel cases and other corruption cases and other bad guys out there. Fentanyl, as you know, is a huge problem that we're trying to fight. The state grand jury, we're the only state entity that can do state wiretaps, which go under very close judicial supervision. It's not a usual and a common thing to do, but it is a powerful tool that we can go to a judge and where appropriate, have that. So there's a lot that the state grand jury is doing on top of just this case, and we've still got a lot to do in this case as well.
All right, Attorney Creighton Waters, congratulations on your victory in this case, and thank you so much for your time today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.